Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is a bonus episode of The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. A dark day in Australia as two gunmen open fire at a Bondi Beach Jewish event marking the first day of Hanukkah. 16 people are dead, including one of the assailants. Police have confirmed there were two offenders and they aren't looking for anyone else. One of them, a 50-year-old man, is dead, and a second, a 24-year-old man, is in a critical but stable condition. They were father and son. There were dozens of people in New South Wales hospitals overnight, from the ages of 10 to 87. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns has said anti-Semitism is toxic, it is cancerous, and leads to devastating implications. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said, "We as a nation are stronger than the cowards who did this." Today on the front page, University of Waikato international law professor Gillespie is with us to discuss this tragic attack and what it might mean for New Zealand. A major question here will be whether the terrorists were already known by authorities. That's not unusual. Apparently one was known to police, but under what circumstances we don't really know yet. We do have that kind of thing here, don't we? A terror watch list.
But we do, and both countries have quite good security services, but we can expect that there will be a review almost immediately about what was known and what was missed. Inevitably, there's always the questions about whether they should have been able to go deeper and had a greater profile of the people involved in this attack. The challenge is that often terrorists are largely invisible, but they always leave fingerprints. It's a question of how deep you're willing to dig to find those fingerprints before the attack.
And I know that there will also be questions about what types of firearms they used and where they got them. Australia banned semi-automatics in the 90s, of course, after the country's worst mass shooting at Port Arthur. The 50-year-old man was apparently licensed. He had been for at least 10 years and had 6 firearms in his possession. They reckon they found all 6 at the scene. But determining kind of what firearms they were will be a major part of this investigation, hey?
Terrorists, when they use firearms, tend to go for particular types. And the way it normally works is that there will be a prohibition on the type of firearm that was used in the attack. The challenge for Australia is that they have some of the strongest firearms laws in the world. Yet this shows you that even with very strong laws, people can still get through the gaps. I imagine they will be focusing not just on the type of platform that was utilised, but also on the licensing procedure of the alleged terrorist, because there will be a series of interviews and intelligence gathering, and they'll now be looking at whether that was adequate and whether any mistakes were made. Importantly, there's often a connection with firearms in Australia and whether they're a member of a club, whether they've been to a range, whether there were warning signs of something that should have just put up a red flag. And all of that will be looked at quite closely now.
And I can imagine New Zealand authorities will be looking quite closely as well what Australia discovers. Also, given that they are now rewriting our gun laws here, hey?
Well, that's right. And obviously with our terror attack in Christchurch, there were mistakes over the licensing, and there was a gap through which the terrorist progressed to get a firearms platform that was highly lethal. And so the way it works is that you always wait for an attack and then you revise your laws and policy afterwards. But for Australia, which already has some of the best laws in the world, it will be a hard point to be to, because Australia has taken pride in its very good record of very few terror attacks in recent years or mass shootings because of its arms laws. But now that will become questionable.
Well, anti-Semitism has grown rampant in Australia over recent years. We've actually spoken about it on this podcast before. What do you make of this?
I think anti-Semitism is a plague and it's a terrible thing, but it should have been greater security at this event. It was foreseeable that there was a place where there was a high density of a particular population. The date was foreseeable, like it was an event, and like often terrorists will be focused on holidays or points of national significance for the community that they target. And so I think that the anti-Semitism with the hatred has all come together at one particular point, and it should have been more foreseeable than it has been. I think the rise in anti-Semitism is a global problem. It's not just in Australia, it's also in New Zealand, and it's also in Europe as well.
And of course, Benjamin Netanyahu has come out pretty quickly and said that Australia, quote, poured oil on the flames of anti-Semitism through its silence on anti-Jewish sentiment. That's not exactly the case, though, is it?
I think that's unfair. I think in part this is a relationship to the wider debate about the war in Gaza and the recognition of Palestine. And there has been assertions made that if you were not fully behind what Mr. Netanyahu was trying to do, you were furthering anti-Semitism. But the two are very distinct, and people may still be concerned about the position of Israel, but that doesn't necessarily make them anti-Semitic. But there are definitely a lot of anti-Semitic feelings in the terrorist community which have now been acted upon. And it means that we've all got to double down with our protection of all of these communities because they are vulnerable. And from here you have a risk which is twofold. One, you have a risk of a copycat, or two, you have a risk of a reprisal against opposing communities. And so there's always a period of tension after an attack where you have to have extra vigilance, and you will see that on the streets of Australia and potentially New Zealand as well, because terrorists are often inspired by the acts of others.
Yeah, there has been a report of an ISIS flag being draped over the offender's car. We haven't got that confirmed yet, but what we do know about those terror groups is that they just feed off of this discontent, whatever it might be. So we don't really need to make a link between ISIS and anti-Semitism, do we?
You will often find when there is a terror attack, more than one terror group will actually try to claim it for their own publicity purposes. But for some groups, they don't look for an act of affiliation, but they do look to encourage people to do acts individually and try to give them enthusiasm for that. What you may see here at some point is a manifesto may become apparent of why they did the acts in question. And often the manifesto will give you the clear link that you need for it to be terrorism, although I think it's a fairly safe bet that this is an act of terrorism that was targeted at a particular population. But the manifesto will often flesh that out.
Do you think New Zealand should be on high alert and perhaps change our alert level alongside Australia's?
I think we should be extra vigilant around the time of the year that we're in and have an increased awareness of the risk to both the Jewish community and the Muslim community as well, because people tend to follow these instances and they can see the notoriety that the killings can do. So partly it's not just about an awareness, it's also about an awareness on the part of the media not to glamorize or show the terror that these acts can do, because it can incentivize copycat performances.
Will New Zealand's SIS be stepping up and monitoring in light of what happened yesterday? I can imagine teams will be, working throughout the night to just see what kind of reaction online this has gotten.
Yeah, I think it'll be reactions online, and often these terror communities are international as well. And so even though they may not have actual formal linkages, they'll all be on the darker side of the internet communicating. And so I imagine that the New Zealand SIS and the police and our associated security agencies will all be taking extra effort over the coming weeks.
In amongst those horrors, though, we saw images of a hero, Ahmed Al-Ahmed, a 43-year-old fruit shop owner. He confronted one of the attackers and wrestled a gun from him. Apparently he has been shot a couple of times, but is in a stable condition. What do you think that means for the wider community, seeing those images as opposed to the ones of devastation?
I think that's a remarkable act of heroism, and I think he will become the Australian of the Year. And it's encouraging to see that the response against terrorism comes from Australian citizens of all flavours, and that you can't just paint a community as good or bad because of the membership of that group.
Thanks so much for joining us, Al.
You're welcome, Chelsea.
That's it for this bonus episode of The Front Page. For more on this story, you can visit nzherald.co.nz.